Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. You all heard the phrase, haters gonna hate, right? Yeah. I'm gonna say this, new phrase, lovers gonna hate. Okay, what I don't mean is, there was a video we made earlier about, do you have to hate as a Catholic? And that was in reference to like other people and stuff. Like, no, that's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is something that I was discussing with a friend of mine named John. John works out at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, and we were talking about how in the whole history of the Christian life, right, in the 2,000-year history of Christianity, there was always, right, the great commandments: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as yourself. And we emphasize that a lot. Hopefully we are emphasizing it in the exact way that honors God. But he reminded me, there was always a prior step to love God and neighbor. That prior step to loving God and neighbor was hate sin. We're all called to hate sin in order to love God and love others. Clarification number one is, when I say hate sin, I am not saying hate self. I know there are some people who will be listening or watching this, and when you hear me say, you gotta hate sin, you're like, yeah, I totally do that. I hate myself. I hate my woundedness. I hate my weakness. I hate my darkness. I hate all of my brokenness. I hate myself already, Father. You don't need to tell me to hate myself anymore. I am not saying hate yourself. In fact, Jesus commands us to love ourselves. Remember the great commandments: love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as yourself. That means you first have to love yourself if you're going to actually love your neighbor well. You are good and fallen. You are good and broken. You are good and loved. And you're called to love yourself too. That honors God. But we are called to hate sin. Second thing, we're called to hate the sin in ourselves far more quickly than we're called to hate the sin outside of ourselves. Right? Because we all know that temptation. That temptation to look around the world and say, yeah, I need to hate sin, and I see it there, and I see it there, and this group, and that person, and we ignore it in our own selves. Well, A, we're no fun to be around if that's our case, and B, we are missing the point. Jesus even said, so don't be pointing out the speck in your brother's eye and neglecting the plank that's in your own eye. I need to look inside myself and say, where is the sin in my own life that I need to hate? Yes, there is evil out in the world. In fact, sin is the most evil thing that exists, or that is. And yet, I need to start by looking at myself and hating the sin I find in my own heart and in my own choices, long before I'm able to look out into the world and see that sin and fight against that. Number one, hate my sin, not myself. Number two, hate the sin in myself far more quickly than hating the sin outside in the world. Third, what's my rationale? What's the motivation? Why should we hate sin? I think that in our postmodern world, a lot of us, if you do hate sin, we hate it because, it holds me back from being the best version of myself, or because it wrecks relationships, because sin destroys lives, and it truly does do those things. But the primary reason for us to hate sin is not because it holds us back from being the best version of ourselves. It's not even because it hurts other people, although those are real. The primary reason to hate sin is because every sin is an offense to God. Now that might sound strange to our postmodern ears, but the worst part about sin is that every sin is an offense to an all-good, all-holy, all-loving God. And that's the reason why we're called to hate sin. Yes, it also holds us back. But even think about this. Why do I want to be the best version of myself? Why do I want to have healthy relationships? Well, a lot of times I want to be the best version of myself because it's me. I care about me. Why do I want to have good, healthy relationships? Because the healthy relationships are great and they make me feel good, and it's about me again. A lot of times our vision of sin is so self-referential. Our vision of following Jesus is so self-referential as opposed to being God-referential. I want to be the best version of myself. Why? Not just so I can have self-fulfillment, but so that He can be glorified. When you become the best version of yourself, when you become a saint, it is not so that you can be self-actualized. It is so that He is glorified. Have you thought about this? St. Irenaeus, he said, the glory of God is man fully alive, fully handed over to joy, fully handed over to love, fully handed over to God. We should want to be saints so that God can be glorified. And I should hate evil, hate sin, because every sin is an offense to an all-good God. But it can't stop there, right? Remember, this is a two-step. It can't just be hatred of sin. It's also got to be a turn. It's got to be hatred of sin and then love of God. Because we all know those people, right? We all know those people who hate sin, and they are awful to be around. They are bitter, they are prideful, they are angry. All they see is sin, and we're called as Christians to recognize and renounce the sin, but then to claim the love of God and the joy of following Jesus Christ. In fact, that was the ancient rite in baptism in the early church. You'd face the west, and that was an expression of turning to the kingdom of darkness, and you renounce evil, you renounce sin, you renounce Satan. Then you turn to the east and profess your faith, your belief, your love for Jesus. In fact, I talk to so many people who say, why can't I love God more? Like, why don't I have more love of God in my heart? And I think it might be because they don't hate. If I don't hate my sin, if I don't hate sin, if instead I've compromised with it, if instead I've kind of, I go to confession and say, well, Father, here's what I'm working on. I'm working on this. I'm working on being more generous. I'm working on being more patient. You don't go to confession to tell the priest what you've been working on. We go to confession to renounce our sins, to confess our sins, to say, I'm guilty of impatience. I'm guilty of a lack of generosity. I'm guilty of a smallness of heart. We confess what we're guilty of, and we renounce our sins. Now, when we do that, we make room for love. Our hearts are finite. Our desires are shaped by what we have in our lives. And if I've compromised with sin, and I have sin in my life, and those things that just, crowd out love, well, of course I can't love God with everything I've got because I've made a compromise with sin. My invitation for all of us is the next time you go to confession, is first be a hater so you can be a lover. Is to actually, I'm renouncing my sins. I'm saying these are the things that I absolutely hate so that I can grab on to this God who is grabbing onto you right now, so I can actually love God more and love my neighbor more. Here's the paradox. The more you hate sin, the more you'll be able to love God and other people, even in their sins. Be a hater and love God and love people. From all of us here at Ascension Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless.